All right, U.S. history students, we're going to move on to our next unit, which includes the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era. So during the Gilded Age in the United States, the economy goes through an industrial revolution. So the Civil War had stimulated mass production techniques that were used after the war to make industrial goods. Industrial goods like iron, steel, and railroads were needed to rebuild the nation after the war and build America's new cities. America's Industrial Revolution began as a wave of inventions. Let me go back for a second. Were created. So if you look at patents, and a patent is a legal document that protects your invention from being stolen. Between 1850 and 1899, the number of patents issued in the United States greatly increases, as you can see. So during the Gilded Age, we have inventions like the cash register, calculator, and typewriter. America's Industrial Revolution included modern day inventions that you are familiar with, but in much more rudimentary fashions. One of the most important is going to be Marconi's wireless transmitter and Bell's telephone, which revolutionized communication. So we had been using the telegraph, but now the wireless transmitter and the telephone are going to take our communication even to the next step. The Bell created a cheap way to transform iron into a stronger, lighter steel, which is going to facilitate the development of our cities. And so these new inventions are allowing for improved, more efficient industrialization. One of the most important inventors of the time is Thomas Edison, also known as the Wizard of Menlo Park. He was the greatest inventor of the 1800s. In his New York research lab, he invented the first phonograph, which is like a record player, audio recorder, and battery. But his most influential invention was the first electric light bulb. America's Industrial Revolution was fueled by four major industries, and I want you to think of this acronym ROSE, R-O-S-E, which stands for railroads, oil, steel, and electricity. The railroad was America's very first big business. Construction grew before the Civil War, as you can see if you look at the map in 1830, 1840, and 1850. But the tracks were all owned by different companies and were not standardized. But during the Gilded Age, railroad construction booms, and it's going to be led by a business tycoon named Cornelius Vanderbilt. So he starts the process of large companies buying small railroads and standardizing all the gauges and schedules in the cars so that the rail system can be more efficient. The railroad expansion led to a boom in the economy. It's going to connect all of the regions of the country, the East, South, and West, and allowed for national trade and regional specialization. The very first transcontinental railroad, which connected the East Coast to the West Coast, was finished in 1869. Eastern railroads were connected to the West by four great trunk lines. And railroads stimulated the demand for natural resources like coal, iron, and steel. And if you look at the map by 1890, you can see that the railroad expansion is pretty significant. And so here you can see graphs that depict the demand for steel and iron, and you can see iron increases, steel increases, and then coal increases. And steel led to skyscrapers, longer stronger railroads and heavy machinery, and we start to see the skyline of the United States change as a result of the invention of steel. The iron and steel industries were dominated by a man named Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie converted his mills to the Bessemer process and made the highest quality steel at the lowest price. Carnegie Steel Company produced more steel than all steel factories in Great Britain combined. Carnegie best represented the American dream by rising from being a poor immigrant to the richest man in the world. And if you look at this cartoon of Carnegie, you'll notice that he is wearing plaid and a kilt because he had immigrated from Scotland. However, Carnegie did not pay his employees very much and did not allow unions in his factories. But he was a philanthropist who gave money to New York City libraries, colleges, and performing arts institutions. Perhaps you've heard of Carnegie Hall in New York. Industrialization is also going to lead to a demand for oil for lubrication and kerosene. The oil industry in the Gilded Age was dominated by John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. Rockefeller used ruthless tactics to buy out competing companies. He lowered costs and improved the quality of its oil products, and by 1879, Standard Oil sold 90% of the oil in America. Rockefeller took advantage of his workers and used his fortune to influence the national government. But he also gave away $500 million to charities, created the Rockefeller Foundation, and founded the University of Chicago. Industrialization led to a demand for financing, so banking became a significant part of the Gilded Age, and American finance was dominated by a man named J.P. Morgan. He was so influential that he bailed out the railroad industry when companies were in trouble. He helped ease an economic depression during the Panic of 1907. And these industrialists like Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller changed the way businesses were organized. Businesses now hired professional managers to oversee employees, improve efficiency, and manage finances. Corporations became a more common business structure. So as you can see in this graphic, this is an organizational chart for a corporation. So you have shareholders, then a board of directors, CEOs hire and manage executives who hire and manage workers. Corporations used boards of trustees or trusts to manage the company. And holding companies to manage other subsidiary companies. So if you look at this graphic right here, you have a holding company. Oh, let me get back. All right, you have a holding company that is managing other smaller companies. Companies used what was called a horizontal integration to buy similar companies to reduce competition. There are lots of different companies involved in the production of oil. You have drilling, transportation, refining, and sales. What Standard Oil did is Standard Oil bought all of the refining companies so that they did not have any competition in the process of oil. When you buy all of the company in one or in the same stage of production, you are using what is called horizontal integration. Carnegie uses a different tactic. Carnegie Steel used vertical integration to buy companies in order to gain materials needed to make or deliver their products. So Carnegie bought companies in all of the stages of production, so mining companies, transportation, smelting, and refining for the steel process. And this is known as vertical integration. Corporate mergers led to giant companies called monopolies that controlled the majority of an industry. And because most monopolies were run by boards of trustees, monopolies became known as trusts. Monopolists justified their wealth in a variety of ways. The Gospel of Wealth argued that it was God's will for some men to gain wealth so that they could serve the public. Social Darwinism taught that natural competition weeds out the weak and allows for the strong to survive. And the government used a laissez-faire, also known as a hands-off policy towards big business, basically letting them do what they want to do without much government intervention. The lack of regulation allowed businesses to become very powerful and exploitive of government and the people that worked for them. So America was changed by the Industrial Revolution. During this time, the United States led the world in industry, innovation, and wealth. Laissez-faire or hands-off government policies and new business tactics do money known as trusts, but the gap between the wealthy monopolists and the poor immigrants grew wider.